I used to think we were the couple everyone envied. Young, happy, and only 2 years into our marriage, life was smooth. I'm Ethan, 27, and I met my wife, Emily, when we were both in college. We were one of those dream pairs, the kind where people roll their eyes and say we're too cute to be real. She's 25 now, stunning in that effortless kind of way, with soft brown hair, a laugh that can fill a room, and an easy charm that people can't help but gravitate toward. If you had asked me 6 months ago, I would have said Emily was my soulmate, that we were rock solid. Now I know better. It all started with a gym membership. We weren't gym rats by any means, but Emily had this idea that we needed a shared thing to stay connected. Some new habit we could do together to make our lives healthier. I was reluctant at first. After all, I've always been more of a stay-at-home, watch Netflix and order pizza kind of guy, but Emily had a way of getting me on board. "We're not getting younger," she'd said, eyes sparkling as she nudged me on the couch one evening. "You don't want to get a dad bod before you're even a dad, right?" I had laughed, agreed, and 2 weeks later, we were members of a bright, clean, slightly too expensive gym not far from our apartment. The first month was perfect. We went almost every evening after work. We jog on side-by-side treadmills, Emily's ponytail bouncing in rhythm, her cheerful grin keeping me motivated. I do weights, mostly fumbling through bad form while trying not to embarrass myself, and she'd focus on strength training. Emily had taken an interest in lifting heavier, and I loved watching her challenge herself. It felt good, like we were improving together. That's when he entered the picture. His name was Jake, the gym star trainer. The guy looked like a fitness magazine cover model, early 30s, sculpted from stone, with a winning smile and the kind of confidence I couldn't hope to match. He wasn't arrogant, though. If anything, he was overly charming, the kind of guy who called everyone buddy, and somehow made you like it. Jake first introduced himself when he saw me struggling with dumbbells one evening. "Hey man, mind if I give you a tip on those?" he'd said, leaning casually against the rack. I nodded, embarrassed, as Emily hovered beside me. Jake gave me a few pointers on form, helped me adjust my posture, and even demonstrated the lift himself. Emily watched with wide eyes, nodding along like a student in class. "See, Ethan? You'll get it," she said, smiling. "You've got a good foundation, buddy," Jake had added, clapping me on the shoulder. "You'll see results soon. Just stick with it." I liked Jake. At first, he seemed genuinely helpful, and his advice made me feel less lost among all the machines and weights. But over time, something changed. Emily started taking more of an interest in his group classes. At first, it seemed innocent enough. She wanted to learn proper form and challenge herself beyond the basic workouts we'd been doing. I supported her completely. Why wouldn't I? I loved seeing her excited about something new. "You don't mind if I join Jake's lifting group, right?" she'd asked one night, twirling her hair as we stood in the kitchen. "You can do your thing, and I'll do mine. It's only twice a week." "Of course not," I'd said. "Go for it." And she did. Twice a week turned into 3 times. Then 4. Emily started coming home later, breathless and glowing, always talking about how hard Jake had pushed her or how much stronger she was feeling. I was happy for her, proud, even, but there was a gnawing feeling I couldn't quite shake. It wasn't jealousy, not yet. It was something else, something quieter. "Jake says I'm making amazing progress," she'd tell me with that big smile of hers. "He's the best trainer I've ever had." And I would nod, smile back, and push down the little voice in my head that wondered why she was always his best client. The days turned into weeks, and Emily's gym routine became more intense. I didn't question it, not at first. It was easy to justify. After all, she was putting in the effort, getting stronger, and glowing with confidence. "You've been killing it lately," I said one evening as I watched her do push-ups in the living room, her body perfectly aligned. Emily beamed at me, sweat glistening on her brow. "Thanks. Jake says consistency is everything. I want to make the most of it." There it was again. Jake. It seemed like every other conversation circled back to him. I didn't say anything. I mean, why would I? He was her trainer. That's what trainers were supposed to do. Encourage, push, inspire. And yet, every time she said his name, It grated on me in a way I couldn't explain. That's when things started to feel off. Emily began going to the gym without me. It wasn't a sudden shift, but rather a gradual change. It started with excuses. I don't want to hold you back, babe. I know you're tired after work, and you've already been killing it. I'll just go later tonight. Or, you've got that project deadline coming up. You don't need to worry about the gym. I'll handle it for both of us. I'd smile and nod. I didn't want to seem insecure, and I couldn't justify making a fuss. But the gnawing feeling in my gut grew stronger each time she left for a late-night session. It was a Thursday evening, about 2 months after we joined the gym. Emily had left for what she called a one-on-one session with Jake. Something about deadlift form. Won't be long, she called cheerfully as she kissed my cheek and grabbed her gym bag. I watched her go, the door closing behind her with a soft click. I don't know why I felt the need to check the time, but I did. 7:15 p.m. I sat on the couch, flipping through channels, but I couldn't focus. My eyes kept drifting toward the clock. 8:30, 9 o'clock, 9:45. I pulled out my phone and sent a quick text. Hey, everything okay? You're out late. It took 10 minutes for her to respond. Emily, yeah, sorry. We went over time, and I stayed to stretch after. Heading home now. Love you. Red heart. Her message was innocent enough, but my gut screamed that something wasn't right. When she finally walked through the door just after 10 p.m., she was flushed and glowing, her hair damp at the roots like she'd just stepped out of the shower. She smiled at me as she kicked off her shoes and dropped her gym bag by the door. Sorry I'm late, she said brightly, pulling off her jacket. Jake really pushed me tonight. I'm going to be sore tomorrow. Something about her tone made my jaw tighten. That's a long session, I said, trying to keep my voice light. You're spending a lot of time with him lately. She shrugged, walking to the kitchen and pouring herself a glass of water. I told you. He's helping me get to the next level. You don't mind, do you? I wanted to say yes, that I did mind, but I couldn't bring myself to admit it. I didn't want to sound possessive, so I smiled instead, forcing the words out. No, of course not. Just checking. Emily walked over and kissed the top of my head, her lips soft and familiar. You're the best, you know that? I watched her disappear into the bathroom, the sound of the shower starting moments later. I sat there in silence, staring at her abandoned gym bag near the door. And for the first time in our marriage, I felt like I didn't know my wife at all. That weekend, while Emily was out shopping with her friend, I sat at home, replaying the last few weeks in my head. Something didn't add up. The late gym nights. The way her phone was always face down lately. The way she lit up every time Jake's name came up. I wasn't ready to accuse her of anything, not without proof. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being played. And that's when I remembered something. The gym had cameras. I didn't know the exact details of where they were placed, but I'd seen them. Small black domes mounted near the ceilings, covering most of the workout zones, the entrances, and the private training hallway. I thought back to what the gym manager, Greg, had told me in passing one day when I joked about embarrassing treadmill stumbles. Yeah, man, don't worry. Cameras are there for safety. They see everything, angles you wouldn't even think of. The idea formed in my head before I could stop it. What if I asked to see the footage? I wasn't proud of the thought. It felt desperate, almost paranoid. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I needed to know what was going on. I told myself it was harmless, just checking to ease my mind. That night, as Emily scrolled through her phone on the couch, I brought up the gym casually. I was thinking about asking Greg for some footage of me on the treadmill. I said with a chuckle, you know, to see what I'm doing wrong. Maybe I'll improve faster that way. Emily's reaction was subtle, but I noticed it. Her body tensed, just for a second, before she forced a smile. That's interesting, she said. You really want to watch yourself on video? Why not? I shrugged. The cameras are there for a reason, right? She laughed, but there was something hollow about it. You're crazy. Just let Jake help you. No need to obsess. Her words hung in the air long after she'd gone to bed. The next morning, I had a plan. I was going to the gym alone, and I was going to talk to Greg. I woke up earlier than usual the next morning, my head spinning from restless sleep. Emily was still curled up beside me, her breathing soft and even. For a moment, I almost convinced myself that everything was fine, that the late nights, the laughs she shared with Jake, and the way her phone buzzed quietly when she thought I wasn't looking were all just coincidences. But that gnawing in my gut wouldn't let me let it go. As I quietly got out of bed and grabbed my gym bag, Emily stirred slightly. Her eyes fluttered open just enough to look at me. "Where are you going?" she mumbled, her voice thick with sleep. "Gym," I said softly. "Figured I'd get a workout in before it gets crowded." She blinked a few times before rolling over, pulling the covers up to her chin. Have fun. I'll sleep a little longer." Her voice was casual, but I could swear I saw a flicker of something. Relief. Maybe? I pushed the thought down, grabbed my keys, and left. The gym was quieter than I'd ever seen it. Most people avoided early mornings on a Sunday, and the place felt almost empty. The smell of disinfectant and faint echoes of top 40 music filled the air as I walked in. Greg was behind the front desk, fiddling with his phone. He looked up and smiled when he saw me. "Ethan, man, what are you doing here so early?" "Trying to get ahead of the day," I said, forcing a casual smile. "Got a sec?" "Sure thing." He leaned on the counter, his expression friendly. "Listen, I need a favor," I said carefully, trying to keep my tone light. "Remember what you said about the cameras? How you can see everything for safety reasons?" Greg raised an eyebrow. "Yeah. Well, it's going to sound dumb, but I want to check some footage. Emily's been on me about my form, and I feel like I'm doing something wrong. I figured if I could see myself, it might help." Greg grinned. "Man, everyone's a critic, huh? Emily pushing you hard these days?" "You could say that," I muttered, feeling a knot tighten in my chest. Greg didn't seem to think much of it. He nodded and gestured for me to follow him toward the office. "Come on back. We keep all the camera archives on file for 30 days. I'll show you how it works." I followed him down the hallway, my heart thudding harder with every step. The office was small and cluttered, with a wall of screens showing live feeds of the gym floor. Greg sat at the desk, clicking through a series of tabs on the main monitor. "Here we go," he said, pulling up a calendar of dates and timestamps. "What are you looking for?" I hesitated. I couldn't ask for anything too specific. It would look suspicious. "Maybe start with this past Thursday evening," I said, trying to sound casual. "That's when Emily said I was wobbling on squats. She was here with Jake, doing a session." Greg nodded, clicking on the date and pulling up the gym floor feeds. The screen split into several smaller windows, showing different angles: the cardio machines, the squat racks, the weight room, and the private hallway leading to the personal training rooms. "Let me know where you want me to zoom in," Greg said, leaning back in his chair. I scanned the screens, my eyes darting from one angle to the next. "There," I said, pointing to the squat rack on the upper left screen. The footage was time-stamped just before 8 p.m. I watched as the video rolled forward in real time. There was Emily, her ponytail swinging as she adjusted the weights. And there was Jake, standing beside her, smiling that easy, confident smile of his. I tried to focus on the form, tried to make it look like I cared about the squats, but all I could see was the way Jake's hand lingered on Emily's back, guiding her lower. Too low. "Man, Jake really gets in there to help," Greg said, laughing lightly. "Dude takes his job seriously." "Yeah," I muttered, forcing myself to stay calm. "He's hands-on, I guess." Greg clicked forward through the footage. I watched as Jake leaned closer, whispering something to Emily that made her laugh. She swatted his arm playfully before stepping out of the rack, smiling in a way I hadn't seen in weeks. My stomach churned. "Anything useful there?" Greg asked, oblivious to the tension building in my chest. "Maybe," I said quickly. "Can you rewind to a little later that night? Around 9:30? Greg shrugged. "Sure. Let me switch cameras. Most people start clearing out by then anyway." He clicked on the hallway camera, the one leading to the private training rooms. My pulse quickened as the screen blinked and loaded the feed. The timestamp read 9:27 p.m. The hallway was empty at first, dimly lit and still. Then, the door to the far left room opened, and two figures stepped out. Emily and Jake. I felt my breath catch in my throat as I watched them on the screen. They were laughing, Emily's hand brushing against his arm as they walked side by side. She turned toward him, and I could see her smile, her cheeks flushed, her eyes bright. Jake said something that made her tilt her head back and laugh even harder. And then, he reached out and tucked a loose strand of her hair behind her ear. The gesture was small, subtle, but it felt like a knife in my chest. Emily didn't pull away. She didn't even flinch. She just smiled at him, her gaze lingering a little too long before they disappeared out of the camera's view. Greg must have noticed the way my hands were clenched at my sides because he glanced at me, his expression shifting. "You good, man? You look like you've seen a ghost." "I'm fine," I said quickly, stepping back from the monitor. "Thanks, Greg. That's all I needed to see." "You sure? We can." "I'm good," I said firmly, forcing a tight smile. "Appreciate it, man." Greg shrugged, spinning his chair back toward the screen. "Anytime. Just let me know if you need more form checks." I walked out of the office in a daze, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my ears. My mind replayed the footage over and over. The laugh, the lingering touch, the look in Emily's eyes. It wasn't nothing. It wasn't paranoia. I knew now, something was going on, and I was going to find out exactly what. The ride home from the gym felt like a fever dream. My thoughts were spinning, tangled together like wires sparking under pressure. I gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white, but it didn't stop the replay. That camera footage, the laughing, the touch, looped in my mind over and over. When I pulled into the driveway, I just sat there for a moment, staring blankly at our apartment window. I could see the faint glow of the TV from the living room, Emily's shadow moving across it as she adjusted something. How does she do it? I wondered. How does she smile and kiss me goodnight while sneaking around behind my back? I swallowed the anger rising in my throat, forcing it down like poison. I couldn't let her see it. Not yet. Emily looked up from the couch as I walked in, her smile bright and casual, like everything was perfectly fine. She was wearing her favorite hoodie and fuzzy socks, curled up under a blanket with her laptop balanced on her knees. She looked so normal, so Emily, and yet I didn't recognize her at all. "Yeah," I muttered, setting my keys down on the counter. "Jim was dead this morning. Got a good workout in, though." "Proud of you," she teased, her voice light. "See? I told you it's worth it. You'll start seeing results soon." I nodded, forcing a small smile. "Yeah, maybe." She went back to her laptop, scrolling through whatever Pinterest board or blog she was looking at, completely unaware that I was watching her, studying her. She looked so at ease, so unbothered by everything. It made my stomach twist. Over the next week, I started paying closer attention to Emily. Not because I wanted to, trust me, I would have given anything to stop the paranoia eating me alive, but because I couldn't help it. It was like a switch had flipped, and every little thing felt significant now. I noticed how her phone was always face down, how she'd smile faintly when a notification lit up the screen before quickly swiping it away. I noticed how she left for the gym at odd hours, sometimes right after dinner, claiming she needed one last session to hit her goals. One night, I brought it up casually as she laced up her sneakers by the door. "Didn't you already go to the gym this morning?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. Emily looked up, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "Yeah, but I felt like I didn't push hard enough earlier. Jake says consistency is everything, so I thought I'd go back for some light cardio." "Jake says." That name had started to feel like nails on a chalkboard. I tried to keep my face neutral. "You sure you're not overdoing it? You've been going a lot lately." She smiled, leaning over to kiss my cheek. "You're sweet for worrying, but I'm fine. I just want to feel my best." And then she was gone, leaving the faint scent of her perfume in the air. I sat there on the couch, staring at the closed door, my jaw tight. Every part of me wanted to jump in the car and follow her, to drive straight to the gym and see for myself if she was really there, or if she was somewhere else entirely. But I didn't. Not yet. Instead, I pulled out my phone and opened the gym's app, scrolling through the trainer schedules. Jake's name was listed, his sessions booked through the evening. But I noticed something that made my pulse quicken. His last listed client for the night? Emily, 7:30 p.m. I glanced at the clock. 7:45. Okay, I thought. Maybe she's really there. Maybe this is just me being paranoid. I stared at the app for a long time, my thumb hovering over the call button for the gym. Part of me wanted to phone in, to ask if Jake was still in a session with Emily. But I knew how that would look. How I would look. The paranoid husband. The insecure one. I couldn't let her, or anyone else, see that side of me. Instead, I sat in silence, the clock ticking loudly in my ears, until she came home at 9:30. Emily walked in through the door, flushed and glowing, just like always. She kicked off her shoes and smiled at me as she pulled her sweatshirt over her head, her tank top underneath soaked in sweat. Long workout? I asked, trying to sound casual. She nodded, grabbing her water bottle. Yeah, Jake pushed me really hard tonight. I feel amazing, though. There it was again. Jake. I forced a smile. Glad you're making progress. Emily grinned, leaning over the back of the couch to kiss me. Thanks, babe. I'm going to shower, okay? I'll be out in a bit. I nodded, watching her disappear into the bathroom. I heard the water start running a moment later. And then, her phone buzzed on the counter. I stared at it, my heart hammering in my chest. The screen was face down, just like always, but the faint vibration was enough to send my mind spiraling. Was it Jake? Was he texting her after their session? I wanted to pick up the phone. I wanted to flip it over and see what was really going on, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. As much as I wanted answers, I wasn't ready for the truth yet. Not like this. That night, as Emily slept soundly beside me, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. My mind was a whirlwind of anger, doubt, and betrayal. I couldn't live like this, trapped between suspicion and denial. I needed to know for sure what was happening. I needed concrete proof, something Emily couldn't talk her way out of. And I knew exactly how I was going to get it. I thought back to the footage Greg had shown me, how the cameras in the gym covered more angles than anyone realized. The weight room, the hallways, the private training rooms. It was time to go deeper. The next morning, as Emily hummed to herself in the kitchen, making her protein smoothie, I casually mentioned my plan. I think I'm going to hit the gym more often, I said, scrolling through my phone. Maybe I'll even try one of Jake's classes. You've been raving about him, after all. Emily paused, mid-pour, before turning to look at me. Really? I didn't think he'd be your style. Why not? I asked, forcing a smile. If he's as good as you say, maybe he can help me too. She hesitated for a fraction of a second, but then her smile returned. That's great, babe. I think you'll really like him. I nodded, taking a sip of my coffee. Yeah, maybe I'll pop by tonight. Her smile faltered, just a little. Oh, tonight? Why not? I said casually. We can even go together. For the first time in weeks, Emily didn't seem to know what to say. She quickly recovered, laughing it off. I'm actually meeting Anna tonight for a yoga class, but you should totally go without me. Anna, another name that was starting to feel like a convenient alibi. I smiled and nodded, playing along, but I wasn't going to the gym to work out. I was going to meet Greg, and this time, I wasn't leaving until I had every answer I needed. The hours leading up to that evening crawled by at a snail's pace. I couldn't concentrate on anything. Work, the news, even my lunch sat half-eaten on the kitchen counter. My thoughts kept drifting back to Emily, to the cameras, to the weight of what I might uncover. For a long time, I told myself I wasn't that guy, the suspicious husband snooping through his wife's life like a paranoid fool. But what else was I supposed to do? I didn't trust her anymore. That trust had started to crack the moment she began her late-night gym sessions. Now, it felt like it had shattered completely. By 5:30 p.m., Emily was getting ready for her yoga class with Anna. She was in the bathroom, applying a little mascara, something she never did for a yoga session before. I sat on the edge of the bed, watching her reflection in the mirror. Excited for tonight? I asked casually. She glanced at me in the mirror and smiled. Yeah, Anna says the instructor's amazing. Where's the class again? Oh, at her studio, she replied smoothly, zipping up her gym bag. I'll probably grab a smoothie with her after, so don't wait up, okay? Sure, I said softly, forcing a smile. I watched her carefully as she slipped on her sneakers and adjusted her ponytail. She looked happy, calm, like nothing was wrong. And yet, I could see it now. The small cracks in the facade. The hesitation in her voice when I asked too many questions. The way her phone never left her side. She kissed me on the cheek before heading for the door. "Love you," she called as she left, the door clicking softly shut behind her. I waited exactly 10 minutes before grabbing my own keys. Tonight was the night. The gym parking lot was nearly empty when I pulled in. The late evening crowd hadn't arrived yet, and the place felt eerily quiet as I walked through the entrance. Greg was at the front desk again, typing something into the computer. He looked up when he saw me, his face breaking into a grin. "Ethan, back again? Twice in 1 week? Look at you, man." I forced a laugh. "Yeah, I'm trying to stay committed." "Hey, do you have a second?" Greg nodded, leaning on the counter. "What's up?" I lowered my voice slightly. "I was wondering if you could help me check something on the cameras again. I think I left my earbuds here the other night, but I can't find them. Thought maybe I dropped them in one of the rooms." Greg frowned, but it wasn't suspicion, just curiosity. "Yeah, man, no problem." "When was this?" "Thursday night. Same time as before." Greg gave me a small nod, motioning for me to follow him. I trailed him back to the small office, my heart thudding harder with every step. The screens on the wall were dark until Greg flipped on the monitors, bringing the gym's feeds to life. "Let's start here," he said, clicking through the archives. The screen split into smaller windows, showing the different camera angles. "Thursday night, around 7:30, I murmured, trying to keep my voice steady. Greg fast-forwarded the footage, his face impassive as the cameras rolled through the empty gym floor. "Where were you?" "The hallway near the private rooms," I said carefully. He clicked over to the hallway camera, the one I knew all too well by now. My eyes were glued to the screen as the footage loaded. The timestamp read 7:43 p.m. The hallway was empty at first. And then, there she was, Emily. She walked into the frame, her gym bag slung over her shoulder, her phone in her hand. She glanced around, her eyes darting toward the camera for a split second before looking away. I tensed. Then came Jake, stepping into the hallway seconds later. He wore his usual gym shirt and shorts, looking relaxed and confident, like he owned the place. I watched as he leaned closer to Emily, saying something that made her laugh. She reached out, playfully swatting his arm, just like she'd done in the weight room before. I felt my fist clench. Greg, still watching the screen, chuckled lightly. "Man, Jake's got all the clients eating out of his hand. Huh? Dude's a magnet." I didn't respond. I was too focused on what happened next. Jake opened the door to one of the private rooms, the one at the very end of the hallway, and gestured for Emily to go inside. She hesitated for a second, glancing over her shoulder as if checking to see if anyone was watching. Then, without another word, she slipped through the door. Jake followed, shutting it quietly behind him. The hallway was still again. Empty. Greg let out a low whistle, leaning back in his chair. "Guess she's getting some extra coaching." His words hung in the air like a slap to the face. My pulse pounded in my ears, but I stayed quiet, forcing myself to breathe through the fury rising in my chest. "Can you rewind that?" I asked, my voice calm. Greg blinked. "What part?" "Just a few minutes before that. I want to see her coming into the gym." Greg shrugged, rewinding the footage. I watched as Emily walked into the gym at 7:30, texting someone on her phone. She smiled as she passed the front desk, heading straight for the back hallway. Jake appeared moments later, coming in through the side entrance, not even stopping to check in. "Guess he wasn't late for work," I muttered under my breath. Greg glanced at me, his brow furrowed. "You good, man? You're looking a little pale." I stood up abruptly, my chair scraping against the floor. "Yeah, I'm good. Thanks, Greg. I think I've seen enough." "You sure?" he asked, clearly confused. "I'm sure," I said firmly. I forced a small smile, though it felt like my face might crack under the strain. "Thanks for helping me out." Greg shrugged, turning back to the monitors. "Anytime, dude. Good luck finding those earbuds." I left the office without another word, the hallway blurring around me. My heart was pounding, my hands shaking as I shoved them into my pockets. I needed to get out of there, out of that gym, away from those cameras. But I had what I needed. Emily had gone into that private room with Jake. She'd looked over her shoulder to see if anyone was watching, and I'd been watching. When I got back to the apartment, Emily was already home. She was sitting on the couch, freshly showered, her hair damp and tied up in a bun. She looked up and smiled when she saw me. "Hey, you were out late," she said, her voice light. "Yeah," I replied, slipping off my shoes. Had a lot on my mind. She tilted her head, watching me carefully. "Everything okay?" I looked at her for a long moment, taking in the face I thought I knew so well. The woman I loved. The woman who was lying to me. "Yeah," I said finally, forcing a small smile. "Everything's fine." She smiled back, completely unaware of the storm brewing beneath the surface. I sat down across from her, pretending to scroll through my phone while my mind raced. I knew what I'd seen. I knew what was happening, but I wasn't ready to confront her. Not yet. I needed more. I needed to catch her red-handed. And when I did, she wouldn't see it coming. I didn't sleep that night. Emily lay beside me, curled up in her usual spot, breathing softly in the kind of peaceful slumber I envied. My mind, however, was anything but quiet. I stared at the ceiling, replaying the footage of her slipping into that private room with Jake. The image burned behind my eyelids, each detail sharper than before. Her glancing over her shoulder, the way he stood so close, the doors shutting quietly behind them. I wanted to confront her right then. I wanted to wake her up, pull out my phone, and shove the truth in her face. But I stopped myself. It wasn't enough yet. Not for her. Not for me. If Emily could stand in front of me, smiling like nothing was wrong while lying straight to my face, she wouldn't crack under some grainy hallway footage. She'd have an excuse. She'd twist the truth like a blade, make me doubt myself, make me feel like the paranoid husband I'd been fighting so hard not to be. No, I needed undeniable proof. Something she couldn't talk her way out of. The next morning, I acted normal. Or at least, I tried to. Emily was already up, humming to herself in the kitchen as she made her usual smoothie. Her hair was tied back in a loose ponytail, her oversized hoodie hanging off her shoulders. She looked so innocent, so Emily, that for a second I almost forgot. "Morning," she chirped as I walked in, smiling brightly. "Morning," I muttered, grabbing a mug and pouring myself a cup of coffee. "Any plans today?" she asked casually. I sipped my coffee, watching her from the corner of my eye. "Not much. Might hit the gym later. What about you?" "Oh, I'm meeting Anna for brunch," she said easily, popping the blender lid into place. "Then probably just errands. You know, groceries and stuff." Anna again. The ever-convenient alibi. "Sounds fun," I replied, forcing a small smile. "Tell her I said hi." She grinned. "I will." We didn't say much else after that. Emily seemed perfectly content, sipping her smoothie and scrolling through her phone while I sat at the kitchen table, staring blankly at my coffee. Inside, I was fuming. The cracks in her lies were so obvious now. She'd become careless, complacent, so sure I'd never catch on. But I wasn't the fool she thought I was. I had a plan. That afternoon, after Emily left for her brunch, I got to work. I'd spent most of the night thinking about my next move, trying to figure out how to catch her red-handed. The gym cameras had given me a taste of the truth, but I needed more. The problem with the hallway footage was that it showed enough to confirm my suspicions, but not enough to confront her. I didn't know what happened inside that private room, but I was damn sure I was going to find out. I remembered something Greg had told me during one of our chats. "We've got blind spots," he'd said with a chuckle. "The cameras don't cover everything, mostly just the main areas and entrances. Privacy reasons, you know? Trainers use those rooms for one-on-ones, so we don't monitor inside." The rooms were private, but there was one way to get inside, a camera of my own. It wasn't hard to figure out the logistics. Emily's gym bag was the perfect hiding spot. I'd seen her leave it on the floor dozens of times, leaning against the bench while she worked out or trained with Jake. If I could plant something small, something discreet, I'd finally know the truth. I drove to the nearest electronics store and picked up a tiny, motion-activated camera. It wasn't fancy, but it would do the job. The battery life was a few hours, enough to capture what I needed if she went back to that private room. By the time I got home, Emily was back from brunch, sitting on the couch with her laptop. "Hey, you're back early," she said without looking up. "Yeah," I replied, setting down the bag from the store and keeping it casual. "Picked up a few things I needed." She nodded, uninterested, and went back to whatever she was reading. I took the camera to the bedroom, quickly unpacking it and tucking it into my desk drawer. My hands were shaking slightly as I tested it out. The feed was clear, and the motion activation worked perfectly. Now all I had to do was wait. The opportunity came that evening. Emily was in the bathroom getting ready for another late session with Jake. I sat on the edge of the bed, watching her carefully as she grabbed her gym bag and checked her phone. "You're heading out again?" I asked, feigning disinterest. "Yeah," she said, slipping on her sneakers. "Jake's got a new program he wants me to try. I'll probably stay late, so don't wait up." She flashed me a smile, one I couldn't even bring myself to return. Instead, I nodded. "Okay, have a good workout." She grabbed her keys and gym bag, kissed me on the cheek, and left. The moment I heard the door close, I sprang into action. I pulled the camera from the drawer, my heart hammering in my chest as I turned it on and slipped it into the side pocket of her gym bag. She wouldn't notice it, at least, not unless she was looking for it. Now, all I had to do was wait for her to leave the bag unattended. I spent the next 2 hours pacing the living room, my thoughts racing. Every time I glanced at the clock, the minutes seemed to stretch endlessly. I knew Emily was at the gym, or at least I hoped she was. The camera would pick up movement as soon as she set the bag down, and by tomorrow, I'd have my answers. By the time she came home, it was nearly 10:30. "Hey," she called out as she walked through the door, dropping her bag onto the floor. "You're still up?" I looked up from the couch, keeping my expression neutral. "Yeah, couldn't sleep." She kicked off her shoes, stretching with a satisfied sigh. "Man, Jake killed me tonight. I'm going to be sore tomorrow." I swallowed the lump in my throat, my jaw tight. "Sounds intense." She grinned, walking over to kiss me on the forehead. "It was. I'm gonna shower, okay?" I nodded, watching her disappear into the bathroom. The moment I heard the water running, I grabbed her gym bag. My hands shook as I pulled out the camera, slipping it quickly into my pocket before setting the bag back where she dropped it. I rushed to the bedroom, shutting the door behind me as I opened the app to check the footage. My heart was pounding so hard I thought I might pass out. The camera feed loaded slowly, each second feeling like an eternity. I fast-forwarded through the empty, muffled footage of the gym bag being jostled around, Emily walking, placing it on the floor, doing her routine, and then, there it was. The motion detection had kicked in, capturing a clear shot of the inside of a private room. The camera angle was tilted slightly, but I could see enough. The bench, the weights stacked neatly in the corner, the faint sound of a door closing. And then, Jake walked into view. I froze, my breathing shallow as I watched him move closer, saying something I couldn't quite make out. Seconds later, Emily entered the frame. She looked up at him, smiling in a way I hadn't seen in months, soft, flirty, comfortable. Jake said something that made her laugh, and then, he leaned in, and she didn't pull away. The camera froze on that moment, Jake's lips brushing against hers, her hands on his chest, their bodies way too close, before the motion stopped and the feed cut out. I stared at the screen, numb, my ears ringing. It was real. The lies, the late nights, the excuses, all of it. Emily was cheating on me. And now, I had the proof. I didn't move for a long time. The image of Emily and Jake, her smile, the way she leaned into him, was burned into my mind. My hands trembled as I stared at the frozen frame on my phone screen, my breathing shallow, my chest tight. I had suspected this for weeks. I had felt it in my gut. But nothing could have prepared me for the moment I saw it with my own eyes. There was no more doubt, no excuses or innocent explanations. Emily was cheating on me. I finally forced myself to stand, my legs unsteady as I paced the room. The adrenaline coursing through me left me shaking, my thoughts spinning out of control. I wanted to scream, to break something, to storm into the bathroom and confront her right then and there. But I didn't. The cold, rational part of me reminded me of something important. She doesn't know I know. Not yet. And I could use that. I tucked my phone into my pocket, grabbed my laptop, and sat down at the desk. My hands still trembled as I transferred the footage from my camera to my hard drive. I made copies on the cloud, a USB drive, anywhere I could think of. If Emily thought she could talk her way out of this, I was going to make damn sure she didn't stand a chance. By the time the shower turned off, I had hidden the USB drive and shut my laptop. I sat back on the bed, staring at the wall, trying to steady my breathing. "You okay?" Emily's voice jolted me out of my trance. She stood in the doorway, her hair damp, wrapped in a towel. She looked at me with a faint smile, her eyes soft. To anyone else, she looked like a loving wife checking in on her husband. But I knew better now. I swallowed the bitterness rising in my throat and forced a small smile. "Yeah, just tired." She nodded, stepping back into the bathroom. "Don't stay up too late. You look exhausted." "You look exhausted." The irony of it almost made me laugh. I didn't go into work. I couldn't. The thought of pretending like everything was fine, like my wife wasn't sneaking around behind my back, made me feel sick. Instead, I sat in the kitchen with my coffee, staring at the empty chair across from me, replaying the footage in my mind. Emily walked out of the bedroom, wearing her usual gym leggings and a hoodie, her hair pulled back into a ponytail. She grabbed her water bottle from the counter and smiled at me. "Morning," she chirped, like it was any other day. "Morning," I said flatly, taking a sip of my coffee. Her brow furrowed slightly. "You okay? You seem off." "I'm fine," I lied, forcing my voice to stay steady. "Just didn't sleep well." She walked over, placing her hand on my shoulder. The touch made my skin crawl, but I didn't flinch. "You've been stressed lately," she said softly. "Maybe we should go on a date night soon? Just the two of us." I looked up at her, searching her face for any sign of guilt. There was nothing, just the same calm, practiced smile she always wore. A date night? Was that her way of balancing the scales? Of easing the guilt she must have felt? I forced a smile. "Yeah, that sounds nice." Emily grinned and kissed the top of my head. "I'm off to the gym. I'll see you later." "Yeah," I said softly, watching her grab her gym bag and head for the door. The moment it closed behind her, I exhaled sharply, gripping my coffee mug so hard I thought it might crack. I wasn't going to let her keep doing this. Not for another day. By noon, I was sitting in my car, parked outside the gym. My heart thudded in my chest as I stared at the entrance, watching people come and go. I wasn't here to confront Emily, not yet. I was here to finalize my plan. I picked up my phone and dialed a familiar number. "Greg," I said when he answered. "It's Ethan." "Hey man, back again? You're basically a regular now," he joked. "Yeah, something like that," I replied tightly. "Listen, I need your help with one more thing." "Sure," Greg said, his tone easy. "What's up?" I hesitated for just a second before saying the words I'd rehearsed in my head all morning. "I need to check last night's footage again. The private hallway. Something's been bothering me, and I want to confirm something." Greg paused. "Man, are you sure everything's okay?" "Yeah," I said quickly. I need to see it for myself." There was silence on the other end, but finally, Greg sighed. "All right, come on in. I'll help you out." Greg didn't question me as he led me back to the office, though I could tell he thought something was off. I sat beside him, watching as he pulled up the gym's camera feed from the night before. "Here we go," Greg said, clicking through the timestamps. "Thursday evening, hallway cam. You're looking for Emily again?" I nodded, my jaw tight. The footage began to play. The timestamp read 7:42 p.m. I watched as Emily walked into frame, just like before. She glanced over her shoulder, checking for anyone watching, before slipping into the same private room with Jake. But this time, I didn't stop there. "Fast forward about an hour," I said quietly. Greg gave me a curious look, but did as I asked. The footage blurred as the hallway remained empty, the clock ticking forward. And then, at 8:45 p.m., the door opened. Jake stepped out first, running a hand through his hair as he looked around. A moment later, Emily followed. She was smiling, her face flushed, her ponytail slightly undone. They said something to each other, something the camera couldn't pick up, and then Jake reached out, brushing his hand against her lower back as they walked out of frame. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding in my ears. Greg leaned back in his chair, his face pale as he realized what he was watching. Shit, man. I didn't know. I stood up abruptly, my hands shaking as I grabbed my phone. Thanks, Greg. That's all I needed. Ethan, wait. But I was already out the door. By the time I got home, the adrenaline had worn off, leaving me hollow and exhausted. I had everything I needed. The hallway footage, the hidden camera feed, the lies, all of it. There was no room for doubt anymore. Emily came home later that evening, smiling brightly as she set her gym bag down by the door. You'll never believe what Jake made me try tonight, she said, laughing. I looked at her, my expression calm. I bet. She paused, tilting her head at me. You okay? You've been acting weird. I smiled faintly, standing up from the couch and walking past her. I'm fine, Em. Where are you going? She asked, her voice curious. Nowhere, I replied smoothly, grabbing my phone. Just getting things ready. For what? I turned to look at her, my smile cold and calculated. For us. Emily blinked, clearly confused, but I didn't offer her an explanation. Not yet. Because tomorrow would be the day everything changed. Tomorrow, I'd confront her, and she wouldn't see it coming. The morning felt colder than usual. It wasn't the weather, just the weight of what I knew. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the faint steam rising from my coffee, the bitter scent barely registering. My phone was on the table in front of me, the hidden camera footage and hallway recordings ready at my fingertips. Emily walked into the room, her usual bright energy filling the silence like nails on a chalkboard. She had no idea what was coming. Morning, she chirped, leaning against the counter as she poured herself a smoothie. You're up early again. Yeah, I muttered, taking a sip of coffee. Couldn't sleep. She glanced at me, brow furrowing slightly. You've been saying that a lot lately. Are you sure everything's okay? I forced myself to meet her eyes. It wasn't easy. She still looked like the woman I loved, the woman I thought I knew. Her hair was tied back in a lazy ponytail, her face still soft and unguarded from sleep. There was no guilt in her expression, no hint that she was sneaking around behind my back. She was good at hiding it. Everything's fine, I said softly, my voice steady. Don't worry about me. Her smile returned as she set her smoothie down. Well, you should try to relax today. I'm heading to the gym later. Jake's got me trying some new workouts. Of course he does. I nodded, forcing my expression to remain neutral. Sounds good. She smiled, kissed the top of my head, and left the kitchen. I heard her humming softly as she disappeared into the bedroom to get ready for the day. I stared down at my coffee, my jaw tight. Today was the day. By the time Emily left for the gym, I was ready. I waited for her car to pull out of the driveway before heading into the bedroom and opening the closet. The hidden USB drive was still exactly where I'd left it, tucked safely behind an old shoebox. I pulled it out, staring at the tiny device for a moment before slipping it into my pocket. The camera footage, the hallway recordings, all of it. I sat on the edge of the bed, the weight of what I was about to do settling over me. Confronting her wasn't going to be easy. I'd spent weeks watching the cracks in our marriage widen into a chasm. Now, I was ready to push her over the edge, along with her lies. My phone buzzed suddenly, jolting me out of my thoughts. It was a text from Greg. Greg, hey man, just checking in. You good? I stared at the message for a moment, debating whether or not to respond. I appreciated Greg, but I didn't have time for his sympathy right now. I typed out a quick reply. Me, yeah, I'm good. Thanks, man. I pocketed my phone, grabbed my keys, and left the apartment. I wasn't just going to wait for Emily to come home. I needed to make sure every last detail of my plan was in place. The parking lot was quiet when I arrived. I sat in my car for a moment, scanning for familiar faces, half expecting to see Emily or Jake stepping out of the gym together. But there were only a few cars scattered across the lot. I walked inside, my heart pounding with a mix of nerves and adrenaline. The receptionist at the front desk barely glanced up as I passed. I made my way toward the back hallway, keeping my head down. I knew where I was going. The hallway was empty when I reached it, the same hallway I'd seen so many times on the camera footage. I glanced at the door to the private training room. The door where Emily and Jake had disappeared. The door that, in my mind, had become the symbol of everything I'd lost. I clenched my fists at my sides, my jaw tight. Not yet. Instead, I turned and headed toward the manager's office. Greg was sitting at his desk, typing something into the computer. He looked up when he saw me, his face a mixture of surprise and concern. "Ethan," he said, "what are you doing here?" "I need one last favor," I said quietly, closing the door behind me. Greg frowned, setting his pen down. "What's going on, man?" I took a deep breath, pulling the USB drive out of my pocket and holding it up. "I need to borrow one of the gym's laptops. Just for a few minutes." Greg's brow furrowed. "What's that?" "Proof," I said flatly. "Proof that my wife has been lying to me. Proof that she's been cheating with Jake." Greg paled, his eyes widening. "Shit, Ethan. Are you serious?" I nodded, my hand steady as I set the USB drive on his desk. "I have footage. From the cameras here. And I need to set up everything for tonight." Greg didn't argue. He stared at me for a long moment before reaching for the laptop on his desk. "All right. What do you need?" An hour later, I was back home. I set the laptop on the dining room table, the screen angled just right so that Emily wouldn't be able to miss it. The video files were queued up, ready to play with the click of a button. I stood there for a moment, staring at the laptop, my hands trembling slightly. I knew what I was about to do. I knew what it would cost me, but I wasn't backing down. I sat on the couch, phone in hand, and waited. Emily walked through the door just after 8 p.m., her gym bag slung over her shoulder, her ponytail slightly messy. She smiled when she saw me sitting there, her expression bright and unbothered. "Hey, you're home early." I nodded, my face unreadable. "Yeah, thought I'd wait up for you." She kicked off her shoes, setting her bag down by the door. "That's sweet. Long day?" "You could say that," I replied, my tone cold. Something in my voice must have tipped her off because her smile faltered slightly. "You okay?" I didn't answer. Instead, I gestured toward the dining table. "Why don't you sit down, Em? I have something I want to show you." Her brow furrowed, her gaze darting between me and the laptop. "What is this?" "Just sit," I said softly, my voice steady. She hesitated for a moment, clearly uneasy now, but she walked over to the table, pulling out a chair and sitting down slowly. I stood behind her, the weight of the moment pressing down on me as I reached for the laptop. My finger hovered over the touchpad. "What's going on, Ethan?" she asked, her voice wary. I didn't answer. Instead, I clicked play. The screen lit up with the hallway footage first. Emily's face froze as she watched herself walk into frame, her gym bag slung over her shoulder, her gaze darting nervously as she followed Jake into the private training room. The color drained from her face. "Ethan," she whispered, her voice trembling. "What is this?" I ignored her, clicking to the next video, the hidden camera footage. The moment Jake leaned in, kissing her, her hands on his chest, their bodies too close. Emily shot out of her chair, her face pale as she turned to me. "Where did you get that?" "Does it matter?" I asked coldly, meeting her wide, panicked eyes. "Ethan, I can explain." "Explain what, Emily?" I cut her off sharply, my voice like ice. "Explain how you've been sneaking around behind my back for weeks? Explain how you've been lying to my face while you run off to him?" She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Tears welled in her eyes as she stammered, "It's not what it looks like." "It's exactly what it looks like," I snapped, my voice rising. "I trusted you, Emily. I believed every word you said while you were out there throwing away everything we had." The silence that followed was deafening. She sank back into the chair, burying her face in her hands. I stood there, watching her, the anger in my chest burning hotter than ever. This was just the beginning. Emily had no idea what was coming next. The silence that followed my confrontation hung in the air like a thick fog. Emily sat slumped in the chair, her face pale, her hands trembling as she stared at the laptop screen. The footage of her and Jake, undeniable, indisputable, still flickered faintly on the screen before I closed it with a soft click. "Ethan, please," she choked out, tears running down her face. "I can explain. It's not what you think." I laughed bitterly, the sound so hollow I barely recognized it as mine. "Not what I think," I repeated, stepping back as if her words might burn me. "Emily, I watched you. I saw you." She wiped at her cheeks with shaking hands, her voice trembling. "It was a mistake. I swear to you, Ethan." "Stop." I cut her off coldly, my voice sharp. "Don't insult me by calling this a mistake. A mistake is forgetting an anniversary or breaking a glass. This was a choice. Over and over again, you chose to lie to me. You chose him." Her shoulders slumped, as if my words had knocked the fight out of her. She looked up at me then, her eyes red and glassy. "I didn't mean for it to happen. Didn't mean for it to happen?" I repeated, my anger simmering under the surface. "How many times, Emily? How many nights have you gone to him and then come home to me, smiling like everything was fine?" She opened her mouth, but no words came. "That's what I thought," I muttered bitterly, running a hand through my hair as I started pacing the room. My mind was spinning, my chest tight with a mix of fury and betrayal. I couldn't even look at her without feeling sick. "How long?" I asked finally, my voice low and tight. Emily's head snapped up. "What? How long has it been going on?" I demanded, stopping to glare at her. "I want the truth, Emily. For once in your life, just give me the goddamn truth." She swallowed hard, looking down at her hands as fresh tears spilled onto her cheeks. "A few months," she whispered. "A few months," I repeated, the words hitting me like a punch to the gut. I let out a hollow laugh, shaking my head. "Unbelievable. So this whole time, while I was here, working, trusting you, you were with him?" Emily sobbed softly, her face buried in her hands. "I'm sorry, Ethan. I didn't want to hurt you." "Didn't want to hurt me?" My voice rose with each word, the anger bubbling to the surface now. "Do you even hear yourself right now? You destroyed me, Emily. You destroyed us. Everything we built together, gone, because you couldn't keep your hands off your gym trainer." She flinched at my words, but I didn't care. I wanted her to feel the weight of what she'd done. I wanted her to understand how deeply she'd broken me. "I was good to you," I said, my voice quieter now but no less sharp. "I gave you everything I had, and this is how you repay me?" "I know," she whispered, looking up at me, her face streaked with tears. "You're right. I don't deserve your forgiveness. I messed up. I messed everything up." I stared at her for a long moment, my heart pounding in my chest. A part of me wanted to scream at her, to throw something, to let the fury consuming me take control. But I didn't. Instead, I turned away, walking to the window and staring out into the dark night. My reflection stared back at me in the glass, tired, broken, unrecognizable. I took a deep breath, forcing the anger to settle. I'd waited too long, planned too carefully, to let this confrontation spiral out of my control. "You're right," I said finally, my voice calm but ice cold. "You don't deserve my forgiveness, and you won't get it." Emily's breath hitched as she looked at me, her face crumpling. "Ethan, please. I love you." "Stop," I said sharply, turning to face her. "You don't get to say that anymore. Love isn't what you did. Love doesn't lie. Love doesn't cheat." She opened her mouth to argue, but I didn't let her. I grabbed the laptop, pulling the USB drive out and holding it up for her to see. "You think I'm done, Emily?" I asked, my voice dangerously calm. "I'm just getting started." Her eyes widened. "What do you mean?" "You'll find out soon enough," I said, slipping the USB drive into my pocket. "But know this, I'm not just walking away. You don't get to ruin my life and come out of this unscathed." "Ethan, no. Please," she begged, standing up from the chair, her voice desperate. "Don't do this. Don't make this worse than it already is." "Worse?" I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. "You haven't even seen worse yet." I grabbed my jacket, heading for the door. Emily followed me, panic clear in her voice. "Where are you going?" "Ethan, please, Can't we talk about this? I stopped with my hand on the doorknob, turning to look at her one last time. You made your choice, Emily. Now you're going to live with it. With that, I walked out the door, leaving her standing there in the apartment. The same apartment where we laughed, loved, and built a life together. Now, it was just a place full of lies. I sat in my car for a long time, staring at the steering wheel as my breathing slowly steadied. My mind was clear now. For the first time in weeks, the storm inside me had settled into something colder. I had all the proof I needed. Emily's lies were exposed, and she knew the truth was out. But this wasn't over yet. I wasn't just going to leave quietly. She'd betrayed me, humiliated me, made a mockery of our marriage, and I wasn't about to let her walk away without consequences. Jake wasn't getting away with this either. The smug trainer who thought he could waltz into my life and take what wasn't his, he'd learn exactly who he'd messed with. I pulled the USB drive out of my pocket, staring at it for a moment before tucking it away safely. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about justice. Emily and Jake had made their choices. Now it was my turn. I sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel, the USB drive like a loaded weapon in my pocket. My mind was calm, eerily calm, considering everything that had happened. For weeks, I'd been unraveling Emily's lies, drowning in my own suspicions and doubts. Now, the truth was out, and the anger I'd felt had hardened into something sharper, colder, purpose. Emily and Jake didn't know it yet, but I was about to blow their little world apart. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I landed on Greg. He had been the key to everything so far, and I needed him one last time. Greg picked up on the third ring. Ethan? What's up, man? I need one more favor, I said, my voice steady. He paused. Is this about Emily? Yes. There was a beat of silence. I could hear Greg exhale, like he was bracing himself for whatever I was about to say. What do you need? He finally asked. I need you to confirm something for me, I said. Jake's schedule. Specifically, his sessions tonight. Is Emily booked with him again? Greg sighed. Hold on, let me check. I could hear him typing in the background, and a moment later, he spoke again. Yeah, she's on his schedule for 7:30 tonight. Same as usual. Of course she is. Thanks, Greg, I said. That's all I needed to know. Ethan, what are you going to do? I smiled faintly, though there was no humor in it. Don't worry about it, Greg. Just sit tight. You might want to clear your evening. I hung up before he could respond. The rest of the day was spent preparing. I didn't just want revenge. I wanted to make sure the truth was undeniable. I wanted Emily and Jake to feel the weight of every lie they'd told, every moment they'd stolen from me. I made a few calls, pulling in favors from friends and business contacts who owed me. When the plan was in place, I sat back, staring at the laptop in front of me. The camera footage was queued up, ready to play, but I wouldn't need it tonight. Not anymore. At exactly 6:45 p.m., I left the apartment. Emily wasn't home. She was already on her way to the gym, as she'd so sweetly texted me earlier. When I pulled into the gym parking lot, the place was busier than usual. I spotted Emily's car parked neatly in the far corner, and just seeing it sent a fresh wave of anger rolling through me. Breathe, I told myself. Stick to the plan. I walked inside, my steps deliberate and slow. The gym smelled like sweat and rubber, the air buzzing with the sound of weights clanking and music thumping through the speakers. But I wasn't here to work out. I was here for them. Greg was at the front desk, his expression tense as he caught my eye. I gave him a small nod, then turned toward the back of the gym, where the private training rooms were. My heart was pounding, but my mind was clear. I knew exactly what I was about to do. The hallway was empty when I reached it, silent, except for the faint hum of music bleeding through the walls. I stopped in front of the door to the far room, the door that I'd watched Emily and Jake disappear into so many times before. Without hesitation, I turned the handle and pushed it open. Emily was mid-laugh when I walked in, sitting on the bench with Jake, standing way too close to her, his hand resting on her shoulder. They both froze when they saw me. The room fell deathly silent. Ethan? Emily's voice cracked, her eyes wide with panic. She shot up from the bench, her face draining of color. What are you doing here? Jake stepped back instinctively, his smug confidence evaporating like smoke. Whoa, man. What's going on? I didn't answer right away. I looked at them both, letting the silence stretch, watching their discomfort grow. Finally, I spoke, my voice calm and cutting. You know, I had a feeling I'd find you here. Emily's mouth opened, but no words came out. She glanced at Jake like he might have an answer, but he looked just as lost as she did. Ethan, I can explain. I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. Explain? Explain what, Emily? How you've been sneaking around with him for months. How you've been lying to my face every night. Jake's expression shifted from confusion to guilt as the words hit him. He took a step forward, his hands raised defensively. Hey man, listen. Shut up, I snapped, cutting him off. My gaze turned back to Emily. How long were you planning to keep this up? Did you think I'd never find out? Emily's face crumpled as tears welled in her eyes. It wasn't like that, Ethan. Please, just let me explain. You don't get to explain, I said sharply. Not after this. I turned to Jake, my eyes narrowing. And you? You're supposed to be a professional, a trainer. But here you are, messing around with someone else's wife in the back room of a gym. Jake's jaw clenched, but he didn't say anything. He didn't have a defense because there wasn't one. Hope it was worth it, I said coldly. At that moment, the gym manager Greg appeared in the doorway, his face pale as he took in the scene. Behind him, a small crowd had started to gather, gym members peeking into the hallway, whispering to each other, their faces curious and shocked. What's going on here? Greg asked, though I could see he already knew. I looked at him, my expression unreadable, just clearing up some misunderstandings. Ethan, Emily's voice cracked again, but I ignored her. Instead, I turned back to the small crowd now gathered outside the room. I gestured toward Emily and Jake, who both looked like deer caught in headlights. Ladies and gentlemen, I said loudly, my voice carrying down the hallway, meet Jake, the gym star trainer, and my wife, Emily. Turns out they've been getting a little extra training in these private rooms. A few people gasped. Someone murmured, "Oh my God." Jake's face turned beet red. Man, you're blowing this out of proportion. Am I? I shot back, pulling my phone from my pocket. I tapped the screen and held it up for everyone to see. The footage played. The kiss, the way Emily smiled at him, the way Jake leaned in like they were the only two people in the world. The crowd went silent. Emily burst into tears, burying her face in her hands. Ethan, stop, please. I lowered the phone, staring at her with cold detachment. We're done, Emily. Don't come home. She looked up at me, her face streaked with tears. Ethan, please, I'm so sorry. I turned to leave, pushing through the crowd of stunned onlookers. As I walked down the hallway, I could hear whispers behind me, judgment, shock, pity, but I didn't care. Let them talk. Let the whole world see what they'd done. Emily and Jake deserved every bit of it. I didn't look back as I walked out of the gym. I didn't need to. I could hear the gasps, the murmurs, the whispers following me as I left, each one echoing louder in my mind. Emily's cries trailed behind me like a ghost, faint but unmistakable, while Jake's flustered protests died out before they could reach me. Outside, the air was cool against my face, but it did nothing to settle the fire burning in my chest. My hands were shaking, not from nerves, but from the adrenaline that had been coursing through me since I stepped into that room. I hadn't just confronted them. I'd exposed them, laid their betrayal bare for all to see. And yet, as I sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel tightly, I didn't feel relief. Not yet. The anger, the hurt, it was still there, pressing against my ribs like a weight I couldn't shake. I started the engine and drove away, leaving the gym, and everything that had happened inside, behind me. When I got home, the apartment felt different. Empty, cold. Emily hadn't followed me back yet, and for that, I was grateful. I needed time to think, to breathe, to figure out what came next. I stood in the middle of the living room, staring at the remnants of our life together. Her shoes by the door, the framed photos on the wall, the blanket she always curled up under while watching movies. Each item felt like a punch to the gut now, a cruel reminder of the woman I thought I knew. I grabbed a box from the closet and started packing. Every photo of us, every trinket we collected over the years, I shoved it all into the box, one piece at a time. The anger fueled me, driving me forward. I wasn't going to sit around, wallowing in this betrayal while she tried to worm her way back into my good graces. By the time I finished, I'd stripped the apartment of nearly every trace of her. That's when I heard the sound of a key turning in the lock. The door opened, and Emily stepped inside, her eyes red and swollen from crying. She froze when she saw me standing there, the box of her things sitting on the table. "Ethan," she whispered, her voice trembling. I crossed my arms, staring at her coldly. "I told you not to come back." She shut the door softly behind her, tears welling up in her eyes again. "Please, just hear me out. I know I messed up. I know what I did was wrong, but—" "There's no but, Emily," I snapped, cutting her off. "You cheated on me. You lied to me for months. Do you think I care about your excuses?" She flinched, but I didn't let up. "I gave you everything," I continued, my voice low and hard. "I trusted you, and you threw it all away for him." "It wasn't like that," she sobbed, her voice breaking. "I don't even care about Jake. It didn't mean anything." I laughed bitterly. "It didn't mean anything? You expect me to believe that? You spent months sneaking around with him, lying to my face, coming home like nothing happened. Don't tell me it didn't mean anything." Emily sank onto the couch, burying her face in her hands as she cried. For a brief moment, I almost felt sorry for her, almost. But then I remembered the footage, the kiss, the way she smiled at Jake, like he was the only one who mattered. The pity evaporated. "I'll make this simple for you," I said coldly, pulling a folder out of my bag and dropping it onto the coffee table. "That's the paperwork for the divorce. You can sign it now, or you can fight me on it later. Either way, this marriage is over." She looked up at me, her face crumpling. "Ethan, please. I don't want to lose you. I love you." "Stop saying that," I shot back, my voice sharp. "If you loved me, you wouldn't have done this." She stared at me, her eyes pleading, but I didn't budge. I grabbed the box of her things and held it out to her. "Take your stuff and go," I said flatly. "I don't want to see you here when I get back." For a moment, she didn't move. She just sat there, staring at me like she couldn't believe this was happening. Finally, she stood, her hands trembling as she took the box from me. "I'm sorry," she whispered one last time. I didn't respond. I just watched as she walked out the door, leaving me alone in the apartment that had once been ours. The next day, the fallout from my confrontation at the gym had already begun. Word spread quickly. Of course it did. People talked, whispers turning into gossip, gossip turning into full-blown stories. I heard from Greg that Jake had been called into a meeting with the gym's management. Apparently, a handful of other trainers had started complaining about him, and my little public display had been the final nail in his coffin. By lunchtime, Jake was fired. Greg called to tell me himself, his tone cautious. "He's gone, man. Management doesn't want that kind of drama here." "I'm sorry about everything." "Don't be," I said simply, hanging up. I didn't care about Jake. He was out of a job, and it was his own fault. My focus was still on Emily, and on picking up the pieces of my life that she'd shattered. Later that evening, I sat in the quiet apartment, scrolling through my phone when a notification popped up. A message from Jake. "Jake, man, what the hell was that? You didn't need to ruin my life. This isn't just on me, you know? Emily made her choices too." I stared at the message, my grip on the phone tightening. Emily made her choices too. He wasn't wrong. She had. But the fact that he was still trying to play the victim made my blood boil. I thought about responding, about telling him exactly what I thought of him, but then I stopped myself. He wasn't worth it. Instead, I blocked his number and set the phone down. That night, the apartment felt quieter than it ever had. I sat on the couch, staring at the blank TV screen, my mind replaying everything that had happened. The confrontation, the tears, the betrayal. For years, I'd thought Emily and I were unshakable, partners in everything, building a life together. Now, that life was gone, reduced to ashes by her choices and my need for the truth. But as I sat there in the dark, a strange feeling settled over me. Relief. I was done being lied to. Done pretending everything was okay. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel like I was drowning. It would take time to rebuild, time to trust again, to heal, but I knew I'd get there. And as for Emily and Jake, they'd live with the consequences of their choices. Me? I'd be free. The first few days after Emily left were strange. The silence in the apartment felt both heavy and liberating. I'd spent so long drowning in her lies, suffocated by the weight of my suspicions, that I'd almost forgotten what peace felt like. Now that she was gone, I could breathe. I spent the next few mornings cleaning the apartment, erasing every trace of her existence. I stripped the bed, threw away her toiletries, and even donated the old sweatshirt of mine that she used to steal. The framed photos of us, the smiling couple on our honeymoon, the New Year's Eve selfies, all went into a box in the back of the closet. I didn't have the heart to throw them out just yet, but I couldn't stand to look at them either. It was painful. I won't lie. You don't spend years building a life with someone and walk away without a few bruises. But at least now the wounds could start to heal. I wasn't naive, though. Emily was gone physically, but she wasn't out of my life yet. The divorce was only beginning, and I had no doubt she'd try to spin the story, paint herself as the victim of a strained marriage, or some other cliché excuse. I wasn't about to let her rewrite history. On Thursday afternoon, I got a call from one of our mutual friends, Sarah. I hesitated for a second before answering. Part of me didn't want to hear whatever gossip was going around, but curiosity got the better of me. "Hey, Ethan," Sarah said softly. Her tone was careful, as if she was stepping through a minefield. "How are you holding up?" "I'm fine," I replied evenly, not in the mood for small talk. "What's up?" She hesitated. "Look, I don't know if you've heard, but Emily's been reaching out to people. She's telling her version of what happened." I let out a bitter laugh, running a hand through my hair. Her version, huh? Let me guess. She's the misunderstood wife, and I'm the overreacting, paranoid husband? Sarah was silent for a moment, which was all the confirmation I needed. "Ethan, people aren't stupid," she said finally. "We all heard what happened at the gym. Emily doesn't know what to say when people bring it up. And Jake? That guy's a joke now." I raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "Oh, you haven't heard," she said, her voice lowering. "Someone at the gym started spreading what happened. How he got caught with a married client. How you exposed them in front of everyone. Word got around fast. Apparently, no one wants to train with him anymore. I heard he's been trying to get hired at other gyms, but nobody's biting." I felt a grim sense of satisfaction at that. Jake had swaggered through my life, confident and smug, like he could take what he wanted without consequence. Now the consequences were catching up to him. "What about Emily?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "She's laying low," Sarah said. "Staying with her sister, I think. She's been telling people she made a mistake and wants to work things out, but," she trailed off, unsure how to finish. "She wants to work things out?" I repeated, scoffing. "Yeah, that's not happening." Sarah sighed. "I figured as much. Look, I just wanted to check in and let you know that most of us are on your side. You didn't deserve this, Ethan." "Thanks," I muttered, though the words didn't bring me much comfort. After I hung up, I sat there for a while, staring at the wall. It was satisfying to know that Jake was paying for what he'd done, but it wasn't enough. Not yet. He'd taken more than my wife. He'd taken my peace of mind, my trust, and a piece of my dignity. And I wasn't done with him yet. That evening, I sat down at my laptop, opening a folder labeled The Truth. Inside were all the recordings, the hidden camera footage, the hallway clips, the confrontation in the gym. I stared at the files for a long time, the glow of the screen casting shadows across the room. I knew what I had to do. Jake had spent his career building a reputation as the golden boy of the fitness world, the charming trainer, the guy who could make anyone a better version of themselves. His entire career depended on trust, on image, on being someone people could look up to. I was about to take that away from him. I spent hours crafting the email, careful to lay out the details as clearly and professionally as possible. I attached the videos, making sure there was no room for doubt. When I was satisfied, I sent it to every gym manager in the area. Gyms where Jake had applied for work. Gyms where he might try to weasel his way back into a job. The subject line read, "Not the trainer you think he is." I didn't feel guilty as I had sinned. Jake had built his career on lies, and I was just exposing the truth. 2 days later, Emily called me. I stared at her name flashing on my phone for a long moment before finally answering. "What do you want?" I said flatly. "Ethan, please," she said, her voice shaking. "We need to talk. Just once. Please." "There's nothing left to talk about." "Yes, there is," she insisted. I know I hurt you. I know I messed up. But you can't just destroy my life over one mistake." I let out a bitter laugh. "One mistake? Emily, you spent months lying to me. Months sneaking around with him. That's not a mistake. It's a series of choices. And now you're paying for them." She was silent for a moment, and when she spoke again, her voice was small. "Do you hate me?" The question caught me off guard. I stared at the floor, my chest tight. "No," I said finally. "I don't hate you, Emily, but I don't love you anymore either. And I sure as hell don't trust you." She started crying softly on the other end, but I didn't feel pity this time. "I hope you learn from this," I said quietly. "I really do. But it's not my job to fix you anymore." I hung up, the sound of her sobs lingering in my ears. In the weeks that followed, things slowly started to fall into place. The gym fired Jake for unprofessional conduct, and his name was practically blacklisted in the local fitness community. Emily's sister reached out to me once, telling me she was trying to figure things out, but I didn't care. That wasn't my problem anymore. As for me, I started to rebuild. I found a new gym, one where no one knew my story or my past. I spent more time with friends I drifted away from during my marriage, reconnecting with people who actually cared about me. And for the first time in a long time, I felt free. The anger, the betrayal, it still lingered in the background, like a scar that hadn't fully healed. But I wasn't defined by it anymore. I wasn't defined by what Emily had done or by what I'd lost. I was moving forward, one day at a time. And as for Emily and Jake, they were left to pick up the pieces of their broken choices. The weeks that followed were a blur of quiet progress. I was alone, but not lonely. There's a big difference. Alone is peaceful. Lonely is a prison. At first, there were moments when the silence in the apartment felt deafening. I'd sit on the couch and catch myself expecting to hear Emily humming in the kitchen or scrolling through her phone on the other side of the room. The habits of sharing a life with someone don't vanish overnight. They linger like ghosts in the empty spaces they leave behind. But day by day, those ghosts began to fade. The apartment slowly transformed into something new. I painted the bedroom, covered the soft blue walls Emily had picked out with a bolder charcoal gray. I replaced the old photos with artwork I liked, swapped out the sheets, and bought a new set of glasses because I couldn't stand the sight of the ones we'd picked together. One Saturday morning, I took everything she'd left behind, the hoodie, the forgotten earrings on the nightstand, the throw blanket she loved, and packed it all into a box. I drove to her sister's house, dropped the box on the front porch, and sent a quick text. "Me, here's the last of her stuff. Don't contact me again." Her sister responded hours later with a short, almost sheepish reply. Her sister understood. "I'm sorry for everything, Ethan." I didn't reply. There wasn't anything left to say. That box wasn't just Emily's belongings. It was the last piece of her that still clung to my life. Dropping it off felt like exhaling after holding my breath for far too long. The first time I walked into my new gym, it felt weird. I kept expecting to hear Emily's laugh, or worse, run into someone who knew exactly what had gone down. But no one knew me here. I was just another guy working through his routine, trying to sweat out whatever demons had been haunting him. I threw myself into the workouts, harder than I ever had before. It wasn't about revenge anymore. Wasn't about Jake or Emily. It was about me, rebuilding something stronger. It became a routine. 6 a.m. alarms, pushing my limits, leaving the gym drenched in sweat, but feeling like I'd reclaimed a small piece of myself. One morning, a trainer approached me after I finished a set. She was about my age, tall and athletic, with a no-nonsense vibe that made her seem confident but not cocky. "You've been killing it lately," she said with a small grin. Need any tips? I shook my head, catching my breath. Just trying to stay focused. Fair enough, she replied, leaning against a nearby bench. I'm Taylor, by the way. Ethan. She nodded once, clearly sizing me up. Well, Ethan, if you ever want help fine-tuning your form, let me know. I'm around. I managed a faint smile. Thanks. I'll keep that in mind. Taylor didn't push. She just gave me a small wave and walked off to help another member. For the first time in weeks, I found myself smiling for real. Emily and Jake didn't disappear quietly, at least not at first. The fallout at the gym turned Jake into a pariah. Trainers whispered behind his back, and clients avoided him like he had a contagious disease. Word spread to other gyms in the area, and from what I heard through mutual acquaintances, he struggled to find steady work. His reputation, once so untouchable, was now a stain he couldn't scrub clean. I didn't feel bad for him. He earned every bit of it. As for Emily, she tried to keep a low profile. I heard through Sarah that she moved out of her sister's place and into a small apartment across town. She'd lost most of her friends, the ones who knew the full story, and spent her time working and keeping to herself. Once, I ran into her at the grocery store. She was coming out of the frozen food aisle, her eyes fixed on her phone, when she looked up and froze. For a moment, we just stared at each other. She looked different. Not worse, necessarily, but smaller. Like someone who was carrying a weight she didn't know how to put down. Ethan, she said softly, her voice almost a whisper. I didn't respond. I just gave her a small nod and walked past her, my chest tight but my head held high. I wasn't angry anymore, not at her. I just didn't care. And that, I realized later, was the most freeing feeling of all. The weeks turned into months, and slowly, I became someone I recognized again. I went out with friends, picked up new hobbies, and spent weekends hiking trails I'd always wanted to try. The gym became my sanctuary, a place where I pushed myself to grow, both physically and mentally. One afternoon, as I was finishing a set of deadlifts, I caught sight of Taylor watching me from across the room. She smiled faintly when I looked up, giving me a nod of approval. You're getting stronger, she said as she walked over, a hint of teasing in her voice. I shrugged, wiping sweat from my face. You're not bad at this whole trainer thing. She laughed. You should let me prove it sometime. What do you say? First session's on me. I paused, studying her for a moment. For so long, I'd closed myself off from the idea of anything or anyone new. Trust didn't come easily after everything I'd been through. But Taylor wasn't pushing. She wasn't forcing herself into my life. She was just there, offering a small step forward. Okay, I said finally, giving her a small smile. Why not? The divorce papers were finalized a week later. When the envelope arrived, I sat on the couch and stared at it for a long time before finally opening it. The end of a chapter. No, scratch that. The end of a book. Emily was gone, and so was the life we'd built together. But as I signed the final page, I didn't feel sad. I didn't feel angry. I just felt done. Free. I grabbed the pen, scrawled my name across the bottom, and dropped the papers into the outgoing mail. Before I left the apartment that night, I paused to look at myself in the mirror. For the first time in a long time, I liked what I saw. The man staring back at me wasn't broken anymore. He wasn't stuck in the past. He was moving forward. It's funny how life moves on, even after you think everything has fallen apart. For months, I've been stuck in a loop. Distrust, anger, heartbreak. But as the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, something shifted. The apartment was quieter, sure, but it was my kind of quiet. Peaceful, steady. And for the first time in a long time, I was starting to like the silence. One evening, as I walked into the gym, I realized I didn't feel that familiar heaviness in my chest anymore. I wasn't looking over my shoulder or scanning the room for Emily or Jake. This place, this new gym, had become mine. A fresh start. Taylor noticed it too. She waved as I walked in, her usual confident smirk softening into something more genuine. Look at you, Mr. Consistent, she teased, falling into step beside me. You're practically living here now. Not much else to do when you're single, I replied with a grin, feeling lighter than I'd expected. Taylor rolled her eyes playfully. You say that like it's a bad thing. I shrugged, heading toward the free weights. It's not. She lingered for a second, watching me with a look I couldn't quite place. Then she nodded. Well, if you're ever tired of training alone, I'm here. No pressure. There was no pushiness, no hidden motive, just an offer. And that was the difference. For months, my life had been consumed by lies, by secrets, by feeling like I was 2 steps behind. Now, for once, someone was meeting me exactly where I was. Maybe I'll take you up on that, I said, giving her a small nod. Taylor grinned. Good. About time you realized you can't do everything on your own. The day after that conversation, I took a drive out to the trails just outside the city. It had been years since I'd been there, back when Emily and I used to talk about exploring more, but never actually made time for it. I parked the car at the trailhead and started walking. The air was crisp, and the sun was low on the horizon, staining the sky in shades of gold and red. The stillness out here was different than the silence of the apartment. This was peaceful, natural. As I hiked, I thought about everything that had happened. Emily's betrayal no longer felt like the center of my story. It was a chapter, an important one, sure, but it wasn't the whole book. I'd spent so much time trying to understand why she did it, replaying conversations, looking for signs I might have missed. But out here, with nothing but the sound of the wind in the trees, it hit me. I didn't need an explanation. Some people make bad choices. Some people lie, cheat, and destroy what's good in their lives because they're chasing something else, something they can't even define. That wasn't my fault. I wasn't responsible for her choices. And maybe I wasn't perfect, but I hadn't deserved what she did. For the first time in months, I stopped blaming myself. Later that week, Taylor found me mid-workout, sweat dripping down my face as I finished my last set of rows. Not bad, she said, crossing her arms as she watched me catch my breath. Ready for that session yet? I looked at her, really looked at her. Taylor was different, confident without being arrogant, driven without being pushy. She had this energy about her that made it easy to let my guard down, which was something I hadn't felt in a long time. You know what? I said finally, grabbing my towel. Let's do it. When are you free? Her eyebrows shot up, and she grinned. Tomorrow, 8 a.m. sharp. Deal, I replied, feeling a strange flutter in my chest. Don't be late, she added, pointing at me like a teacher scolding a student. I laughed, shaking my head. Wouldn't dream of it. That evening, as I was grabbing groceries, I saw her, Emily. She was by the produce section, staring at a pile of apples like they held the answer to her problems. I froze for half a second, the old bitterness bubbling up before I forced it back down. She looked different. Not worse, just smaller. The confident, vibrant woman I'd once loved seemed like a shadow of herself. She glanced up and saw me. Her eyes widened, and she opened her mouth as if to say something. But I didn't wait to hear it. I gave her a small nod, polite, indifferent, and kept walking. I didn't need closure. I didn't need to hear her apologize again or try to justify herself. I'd already closed that chapter myself. By the time I got to my car, I realized something. Seeing her didn't hurt anymore. I didn't miss her. I didn't want her back. And for the first time, I felt free of her completely. The next morning, I walked into the gym at 7:55 a.m., feeling more alive than I had in months. Taylor was waiting by the squat rack, a smug smile on her face as she glanced at the clock. Early, she said. I'm impressed. Just didn't want to give you a reason to talk trash, I replied, grinning. Don't worry, she teased, tossing me a resistance band. I'll find plenty of reasons during the workout. I laughed, shaking my head as I followed her toward the mats. The old me, the one who'd been weighed down by anger, betrayal, and grief, wouldn't have believed I could feel like this again. But here I was. I didn't know what was next, and for the first time in a long time, that didn't scare me. I'd survived the worst of it. I'd pulled myself out of the wreckage and started building something new, something better. And whatever tomorrow brought, I knew I could handle it. Life has a funny way of testing you, breaking you, and then, if you're lucky, showing you what you're really made of. For months, I lived under the weight of betrayal, carrying anger, grief, and doubt like bricks on my back. But somehow, I found a way to put them down, one by one. This is what came after. The morning sunlight streamed through the window of my new apartment. Not our apartment, mine. It was smaller, quieter, and didn't have the shared history that clung to the walls of my old place. I liked it that way. Every piece of furniture, every photo, every book on the shelf was mine. It was a space I'd built for myself, and for the first time, I felt at home. The man in the mirror staring back at me was different, too. Physically, I looked better than I ever had, stronger, leaner. But it wasn't just the gym. There was something new in my eyes. Peace, confidence, a quiet certainty that I could handle whatever life threw at me. I grabbed my keys and stepped outside into the crisp morning air. The gym had become a second home to me. There was no longer bitterness attached to it. No memories of what I'd lost, only of what I'd gained. I'd carved a new routine out of the chaos, and it grounded me every single day. Taylor was already there when I walked in, setting up a rack of dumbbells for one of her morning clients. She flashed me a grin when she saw me. "Ethan," she called. "Right on time. That's 2 weeks in a row without you being late. You might actually be getting your life together." "Miracles do happen." I shot back with a grin, dropping my bag onto a bench. Taylor laughed, shaking her head. Over the last few months, she'd become a constant presence in my life. She wasn't pushy about it. She didn't ask me to open up or dwell on what had happened. She just showed up. She challenged me to push harder in the gym and called me out whenever I started slipping. Sometimes, she'd stick around after my workouts, chatting with me about random things. Music, movies, the best local food spots. I found myself looking forward to those conversations. It was the first time in a long time that I'd felt like me again, without pretending to be okay. After my workout, as I wiped down a bench, Taylor strolled over with a water bottle in hand. "Hey," she said, her tone casual but warm. "A few of us are grabbing dinner later tonight. You should come." I raised an eyebrow. "Dinner? As in, like food?" "No, Ethan. We're all going to sit in a circle and chant," she deadpanned, rolling her eyes. "Yes, food. Come on. You can't spend every night alone watching reruns of Breaking Bad." "I'll think about it," I said, smirking. Taylor shook her head. "Don't think about it. Just say yes. It's not that hard." I stared at her for a moment, debating whether I wanted to step out of my comfort zone. But something about the way she smiled, so open and unguarded, made it feel like the easiest decision in the world. "Okay," I said finally. "I'll be there." "Good," she replied, grinning as she walked away. That afternoon, as I was going through old emails on my computer, I stumbled across one from Emily. It had been sitting there, unopened, for weeks. The subject line read, "I'm sorry." For a moment, I hovered over it, debating whether I should delete it or finally read what she had to say. I clicked. Her words were exactly what I expected. Apologies, guilt, regret. She said she didn't know why she did what she did, that she missed me, that she hoped I was happy. I didn't feel anger as I read her words. I didn't feel sadness either. I felt nothing. And that's when I knew I'd moved on. I hit delete. I didn't need closure from her. I'd already found it myself. That evening, I met Taylor and a few others at a small restaurant downtown. It was one of those places that felt warm and intimate, the kind of spot you could only find if you were looking for it. Taylor waved me over when I walked in, smiling brightly. "You actually came." "I keep my promises," I replied, sitting down beside her. The night was simple, good food, easy laughter, and the kind of conversations that make you forget the time. Taylor was her usual sarcastic self, teasing me every now and then, but there was something else in the way she looked at me, something softer. As the night wound down, she leaned over and nudged me with her elbow. "You doing okay?" "Yeah," I said, surprising myself with how honest it sounded. "I really am." She smiled. "Good." And for the first time in a long time, I believed it. When I got back to my apartment that night, I sat on the balcony with a glass of water, staring out at the city lights. The life I'd once imagined with Emily was gone, burned to the ground. But in its place, I'd built something new. I wasn't defined by her betrayal anymore, or by the man I'd been back then. The one who ignored his gut instincts, who trusted blindly, who lost himself in the process of loving someone who didn't deserve it. I was stronger now, wiser. And while I didn't know what the future held, whether Taylor would be a part of it, whether I'd ever truly fall in love again, I knew one thing for sure. I was going to be okay. Life moves forward, even when it feels impossible. You pick up the pieces, dust yourself off, and keep walking. And sometimes, if you're lucky, you end up somewhere better than where you started.